Before we begin, let me tell you this. Sometimes silence holds the loudest truths. Sometimes a smile hides years of betrayal. And sometimes a woman reaches her limit in the quietest way imaginable. What happens when the one who gave everything decides to take everything back? Stay until the end. And don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? They say you don't notice the moment something ends. Not when it ends quietly. It doesn't explode. It fades. A soft dying out, like the last flicker of a candle before the dark takes over. That's what my marriage felt like. A year ceremony of slow extinction. My name is Carolyn Whitaker. I'm years old, mother of 2, and wife, at least in legal terms, to a man I barely recognize anymore. I live in a modest colonial-style home in a quiet suburb just outside Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of neighborhood with hedges trimmed like puzzle pieces and smiling neighbors you never really know. From the outside, we look picture perfect. But the truth is buried so deep under the silence, even I forgot where it started. It was the first night of summer break. We were supposed to celebrate. The house was filled with the scent of my homemade meatloaf, and I even lit candles, like I used to in the early years. But Richard barely looked up from his phone, and when he finally did, he set down his fork, wiped his mouth, and said with a smirk that didn't match his tone, "You're just not fun anymore, Carolyn. I don't even know who I'm married to." He said it like he was reading the weather. No anger, no passion, just disinterest. And the worst part? Our grown kids didn't even blink. Daniel laughed awkwardly, his eyes glued to the sports highlights on his phone. Emily raised an eyebrow, sipping her soda, then changed the subject to her new Pilates instructor. I sat there, in that candle-lit kitchen I'd scrubbed clean, and realized no one saw me anymore. Not really. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Richard snored beside me like nothing had happened. My thoughts spun like a dryer on its last cycle, loud and restless. 30 years, 3 decades. I gave up a career in graphic design to raise our children, support his ambitions, manage the home, and somehow I'd become a shadow in my own life. He used to bring me wildflowers from the gas station when we were broke and 22. Now he barely remembered my birthday. I tried to make excuses. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe I was the one who changed. But deep down, something felt rotten, like a fruit you don't want to bite, even though it still looks whole on the outside. The next morning, he left early for a work meeting, but I saw the text flash across his screen before he left the room. A woman's name. A heart emoji. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I just watched, observed. And the more I paid attention, the more I saw it. The distance, the lies, the way he flinched when I touched his arm. I started to smell another perfume on his collars, catch glimpses of unfamiliar earrings in the laundry, receipts from expensive dinners I hadn't been invited to. I wasn't stupid. I was just tired of pretending to be. But it wasn't just him. It was all of them. My own children treated me like I was made of wallpaper. Decorative, quiet, easy to ignore. They came home when they needed money, advice, or a shoulder to cry on. But not once did they ask how I was doing. Not once. So I stopped asking too. One night, after they'd all gone to bed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened an old photo album, and flipped through the years. There we were, smiling, arms around each other. New babies, birthdays, road trips, all that life, all those memories. But behind every photo, I saw the moment it started to fade. That night, I made a decision. If no one would notice my pain, I'd make sure they'd remember my absence. Not in violence, not in fury, but with the quiet strength of someone who had nothing left to lose. Because sometimes, when a woman breaks, she doesn't scream. She plans, and I had just started planning. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. But still, there's something about betrayal that burns differently when you catch it in full color. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I followed my instincts instead of dismissing them. Richard had been more careful lately, or maybe just more detached. Either way, something had shifted. He was getting dressed more often without me seeing, coming home late, texting in the garage, and suddenly his cologne smelled too strong, like he was trying to cover something. So I did what I never imagined myself doing. I looked through his coat pocket when he left for work. Not his phone. just his coat. I told myself I'd feel better if I didn't find anything. But there it was, a folded receipt from a boutique hotel in Asheville. A 2-night stay, suite upgrade, champagne add-on. I hadn't been to Asheville in 5 years. The date on the receipt? Last weekend. I sat on the edge of our bed and held the receipt like it was a confession letter. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stared at it, feeling something inside me harden. Not break, harden. That was the moment I started to detach. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. When he left for work, I checked our shared calendar. He had no appointments scheduled. When he told me he had an out-of-town meeting, I followed the GPS history on our shared car, something I hadn't realized was even accessible before. He hadn't been to work. He had driven 2 hours away to meet someone. And not once did he call to check on me. Not once did he lie convincingly. He didn't even try. It was as if I had become so invisible, he forgot I could still see. What hurt most wasn't the infidelity. It was the ease with which he discarded me. Like I was a pair of old house slippers he could just replace. There had been a time when he couldn't go an hour without holding my hand in public. Now he couldn't look me in the eye without blinking away guilt. And my children? Oblivious. I tried to hint at things. Emily rolled her eyes and said, "Mom, you overthink everything." Daniel told me to relax, that Dad's just stressed. They defended him. They dismissed me. And that was the moment I realized I was completely, utterly alone inside my own family. I kept every receipt I found, every suspicious timestamp. I made copies of everything, not out of rage, but out of necessity. I remembered our prenup, the one Richard had insisted on back when we married. At the time, I had laughed. "You're the one with nothing," I told him. But I signed it anyway. What he didn't remember, or maybe never truly read, was the clause about infidelity. If he ever cheated, I got everything. The house, the savings, the car. He laughed back then, confident he'd never betray me. I never thought I'd need that clause, until now. I began moving like a ghost through my own home, documenting, recording, watching. I stopped making small talk. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. I went to bed early and woke up before everyone else. I wasn't angry. I was focused. He noticed something was different. One evening, he asked if I was okay. I looked at him, long and quiet. I smiled and lied. "I'm just tired." Tired wasn't even the half of it. I was exhausted from giving so much of myself for so many years, only to be pushed to the side like I never mattered. The woman he once loved had been replaced by a stranger in his eyes. A stranger he didn't bother to rediscover. But that stranger, she was learning to reclaim herself. And in the stillness of my hurt, I began imagining the moment I would finally let go of pretending. Not in a loud, dramatic scene. No, in a way he'd never see coming. Because men like Richard never expected the quiet ones to walk away. They certainly never imagined we'd do it with a smile. It happened in the middle of a grocery store. I was standing in the aisle staring at 2 brands of pasta sauce, one on sale, one not. And suddenly, I thought, why am I still choosing based on what he likes? He hated mushrooms, so I always avoided the chunky kind. But I love mushrooms. I've loved them since I was 12. And yet, for 30 years, I'd silenced even my taste buds for him. That jar of mushroom pasta sauce went into the cart like a declaration of war. Small, invisible to the world. But to me, it was the first open rebellion. That night, I served it with garlic bread and waited. Richard walked in, loosened his tie, and sat down across from me without a word. Took a bite, stopped mid-chew. "You know I don't like mushrooms." I smiled. "I know." He stared at me, confused, but didn't say another word. I watched him eat every bite. I had already started researching flights. Cheap ones, one-way tickets. I chose Cartagena for a reason. It was beautiful on postcards, far enough that the return would be difficult, and exotic enough to sound like the kind of soul-searching trip a man like Richard would think he deserved. A few days later, I pitched the idea over breakfast. "I've been thinking," I began, buttering toast I didn't even want. "Maybe we should take some time. Apart. Just a little space. To think. You said things have felt off. Maybe some time alone would help." He didn't look up from his phone. "Like, a break?" I nodded. "You could go somewhere. Clear your head. I'll stay back. Think things through." He blinked. "You'd be okay with that?" "Of course," I said gently. I want you to find your joy again. His eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, not for me, but for the idea of escape. He didn't ask many questions. That's the thing about men who've already moved on. They don't get suspicious when you start stepping aside. They think they've won. I maxed out the last of my credit card, buying him the cheapest one-way flight I could find. Cartagena, Colombia. Midweek, midday, no insurance. I printed out a fake itinerary, hotels that didn't exist, tours that were never booked. I told him I'd arranged it as a gift, that he deserved something nice for once. He beamed like a boy with a new toy. What I didn't say, what I wouldn't say, was that I knew he was taking her. I'd seen her picture, once, accidentally. A woman maybe 10 years younger than me, all high heels and highlighted hair, with lips too glossy, and a laugh that felt staged. I had no idea how long it had been going on. But I didn't care anymore. Let her go with him. Let her see him snore, lie, disappear into his phone mid-dinner. Let her see how charming turns into condescending after 6 months. Let her see the man behind the facade. Let her be stuck in a foreign country with the real Richard. And while they packed their summer clothes and counted down the days, I smiled in silence and played the perfect wife. "Are you sure about this?" he asked the night before his flight. "I feel a little guilty going without you." I touched his hand. "I want this for you. I really do." I didn't sleep that night. Not out of guilt, out of adrenaline. I had never done anything this calculated, this precise, and I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. He kissed my cheek and promised to come back with answers. I smiled and waved as he walked toward security. Then I turned my phone off. Not just airplane mode, powered off, SIM cards out, every contact blocked, emails forwarded to a new address. It was like erasing a ghost from a haunted house. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was breathing air that hadn't passed through someone else's lungs. The house was quiet when I returned. No TV buzzing, no doors slamming, no passive-aggressive sighs from across the room. Just silence. Not lonely silence, free silence. I made myself tea and sat on the back porch as the sun climbed through the trees. Richard was on a plane, chasing freedom. And he had no idea he was flying straight into a trap of his own making. Let the games begin. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing exactly what's coming, and watching someone walk straight into it, clueless. Richard texted once during his layover, something bland like, "Almost there. Thanks again, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word made my stomach turn. I didn't reply. I imagined him checking his phone again and again, wondering if the Wi-Fi was glitching. By the time he landed in Cartagena, I had already poured myself a glass of wine, put my feet up, and turned off every possible way he could reach me. He didn't know it yet, but his trip had already started to unravel. I could picture it all unfolding. Him walking through customs, his usual arrogance leading the way. The sun blazing down on that high-dollar button-up he wore for travel days. Probably thinking how spontaneous and exciting this trip made him feel. Like he was a man still full of life, not some aging executive cheating on his wife. But Cartagena wasn't waiting with open arms. I made sure of that. There was no hotel reservation, no city tour, no private car service or spa package. Everything I booked was just a facade, a patchwork of fake confirmations and dead-end phone numbers. A beautiful, well-crafted illusion meant to collapse the second he tried to lean on it. He didn't call right away, probably too embarrassed to admit nothing was lining up. Or maybe he still thought it was a glitch. Maybe he believed he'd booked something wrong or misread the emails. But by the second day, the texts started to come faster. "Hey, I think something's wrong with the hotel booking. Carolyn, can you check the confirmation email? They said they don't have us listed. The tour company never showed up. Can you call from your end?" I read every message. I watched the dots appear as he typed, paused, deleted. I didn't block him yet. I wanted him to feel the delay, the invisible distance growing wider with each unanswered attempt. By the third day, the texts turned sharper. "Carolyn, this isn't funny. Where the hell are you? I'm stranded here. You're seriously not going to answer me." And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The name. He accidentally included her in a message meant for me. "Maya's really upset. She thinks I lied. Are you seriously doing this?" Maya. So that was her name, and she was there with him, probably standing over his shoulder while he tapped out messages with his thumbs, trying to keep control of a situation slipping through his fingers. I imagined her face when she realized they didn't have a place to stay, that the hotel didn't exist, that their romantic getaway had turned into a logistical nightmare. I imagined the looks exchanged between them, the blame starting to bloom, the cracks widening. He thought he was escaping the dullness of marriage. Instead, I gave him something he'd never forget. I blocked his number that evening. The next morning, I received an email from a mutual friend, Greg, a former colleague of Richard's. The subject line said, "Can you help him?" I didn't open it. Let them come up with their own rescue plan. Meanwhile, I packed a single suitcase and called a cab. My cruise was waiting. A 7-day luxury voyage through the Caribbean, all-inclusive, adult-only, with a full itinerary of yoga at sunrise and jazz at sunset. I had booked it months ago, a quiet backup plan, a place to go once the trap was sprung. And the moment I stepped onto that ship, the weight of years lifted from my shoulders like an old, heavy coat. I wasn't the woman who waited at home anymore. I was the woman who left, on her own terms, with her own name, her own mind, and her own peace. I watched the coast disappear from the deck and thought about Richard, how he must be sweating in that cheap hostel I found for him on TripAdvisor, how Maya must be panicking, realizing she'd hitched her dreams to a man who couldn't even secure a vacation without someone else's credit card. Let them squirm. Let them learn. Let them see what happens when the woman you cast aside stops playing along. And for the first time in years, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I finally could. I don't know how long he lasted before it all started to cave in. 3 days? 4? From what I eventually pieced together, it didn't take long for the heat, the confusion, and the weight of consequence to fall squarely on Richard's shoulders, or maybe Maya's. The last message I read, before I blocked his number, was half panicked, half pleading. He said they were trying to make it work at a small hostel a few miles from the center, and that it was less than ideal. I had researched that hostel myself. It had 2 stars, no air conditioning, and multiple reviews that mentioned a broken shower and loud street traffic at night. He never mentioned that part, of course, but I imagined it vividly. No luxury breakfast, no sea view, no champagne-soaked nights, just 2 people sweating in a windowless room, each blaming the other more with every passing hour. And while Richard and Maya scrambled to understand what had happened, I ordered a second mimosa by the pool deck and watched the ocean glitter like diamonds around me. I wasn't thinking of revenge. This wasn't revenge. It was education. It was experience. It was the lesson no one had ever thought I'd be bold enough to teach. Some people think suffering is screaming, slamming doors, setting things on fire. Mine was silence. On the 4th day of my cruise, just before dinner, I overheard a man on his phone arguing in Spanish on the deck behind me. His voice rose, emotional and sharp, and though I didn't understand all of it, one word caught my ear clearly. Gringa, white woman. It made me wonder if Maya had left already. And later, that evening, I found out she had. It came from an unexpected place. My daughter, Emily. She texted me while I was halfway through a seafood risotto in the formal dining room. "Dad's been trying to get a hold of you. Something about being stranded? Did you actually send him to Colombia?" I let the message sit for a while before answering. Then I wrote, "I thought a break would do him good." Her reply came fast. "Mom, he says she left him. He's out of money. He said he's sleeping in some horrible place. You have to at least talk to him." That was the moment I knew Maya had cracked, and I felt it. The cruel, quiet satisfaction of justice finally unfolding. I never asked why she left. I didn't care. Maybe she saw him begging friends for money through WhatsApp. Maybe he yelled at her one too many times. Maybe she realized that excitement fades faster when you're surrounded by discomfort. Whatever it was, she was gone. And Richard? He was stranded, humiliated, broke, and alone. I finished my dinner, ordered dessert, and sent one final message before turning off my phone again. He took the trip he asked for. I just helped him pack. The ship pulled into a private island the next day. I swam for the first time in years. Let the salt water soak my hair, my skin, my clothes. I floated on my back and looked at the sky with nothing but wind and clouds above me. And all I could think was, I was finally free of him. But I wasn't done yet. Because when he got back, if he ever got back, he'd learn the final part of this lesson. and it would hit even harder than sleeping on a roach-infested hostel cot. The ocean has a way of washing things clean, not just your skin, but your soul. That week at sea was more than a vacation. It was a resurrection. Every morning, I woke with the sun pouring through the balcony windows of my cabin, kissed by the salty breeze and the distant sound of waves slapping against the hull. I stopped setting alarms. I stopped worrying about emails. I stopped wondering what Richard was doing, or how uncomfortable his cot was, or if Maya had truly left him or just threatened to. I didn't need to know anymore, because I was finally living in a world where his actions no longer dictated the temperature of my day. The first time someone called me ma'am on the ship, I didn't flinch. Usually it made me feel old, dismissed. But this time, I wore it like armor. I was no longer shrinking under the weight of time. I was expanding, stretching into space I had forgotten belonged to me. At the open deck lounge, I met other women, all older than me, some divorced, some widowed, all tired of carrying the invisible weight of everyone else's expectations. We shared drinks and laughter, traded stories that were both heartbreaking and healing. There was Margaret from Chicago, who left her husband after years when she found a second phone hidden in the closet. Janine from Oregon, whose daughter stopped talking to her when she refused to co-sign on another credit card. Teresa, a retired nurse who came on the cruise alone after her husband died, and discovered she liked herself more than she ever did when he was alive. I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough. And when I did, none of them gasped. None of them judged. They just nodded, sipped their drinks, and said, "Good for you." One afternoon, I sat alone on the sun deck, notebook in hand, and made a list titled Things I Forgot I Loved, sketching, mornings without chaos, cooking for pleasure, not for praise, walking barefoot on cold floors, jazz at night, mushrooms on pizza. No one ever asks a wife what she misses about herself. They only ask what she misses about her husband. But I didn't miss Richard. I missed the woman I used to be before I spent decades shape-shifting into what everyone else needed. I started to imagine a new life. Not a fantasy, not a drastic reinvention, just a quieter, firmer version of myself. One who didn't apologize for taking up space. One who didn't flinch when people looked disappointed. One who knew exactly where she stood. The cruise docked in Miami on a Sunday. I stepped off the ship with sun-kissed skin, 2 new books in my bag, and no plan to return to the version of me that ever waited by the phone. Back home, the silence was different. It wasn't hollow. It was mine. I brewed coffee in the middle of the afternoon and played old records in the kitchen while unpacking. I opened windows and let the fresh air sweep through the rooms like a reset. Then I opened the closet and began to pack his things, one box at a time, neatly, without malice, without tears. I folded his shirts like I had 100 times before. Only this time, I did it for me. The closet became mine again. I cleared the bathroom cabinets, the garage shelf, the bedside drawers. By nightfall, the house no longer looked like a home we shared. It looked like a place where someone used to live. And tomorrow, he would return, from paradise lost, from betrayal doubled back on him, and discover what it means to be removed from a life you never appreciated. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. Because closure sometimes doesn't come from a confrontation. It comes from a locked door, a garage full of cardboard boxes, and the quiet knowledge that you're finally free. The doorbell rang once, just one solitary chime. I was standing in the kitchen, barefoot, sipping black coffee. I didn't rush. I didn't even flinch. I walked slowly to the front window, pulled back the curtain just enough, and there he was. Richard. He looked nothing like the man who had left 2 weeks ago. His shirt was wrinkled and clung to him in patches from the sweat. His hair, always so carefully styled, now sat in flat, greasy disarray. And he had bags under his eyes so deep it looked like they were holding decades, not days. He stood in front of a stack of cardboard boxes, 9 of them, every single one packed by my hands, taped shut and labeled clearly. Books, winter clothes, office junk. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient, practical, final. He rang the bell again, then knocked. "Carolyn?" he called out. I didn't answer. He backed up and looked at the house, our house, the one I inherited from my parents, the one he convinced me to refinance, but that I never took his name off of. He stepped toward the door again and knocked harder. Carolyn, what the hell is going on? I walked to the door slowly, opened it halfway, and stood behind the screen. I didn't unlock it. I didn't step out. He blinked. You packed up the whole house? No, I said calmly. Just your part of it. His face flushed with something between confusion and indignation. You can't just throw me out. I raised an eyebrow. According to our prenup, which you insisted on, I absolutely can. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew I was right. He just hadn't expected me to actually do it. And that was the thing, wasn't it? He never expected me to do anything. You can't be serious, he said, voice rising now. We've been married 30 years. 30 years ago, I thought that meant something. His fists clenched at his sides. I could see the tension creeping into his shoulders. I lost everything over there. You sent me into a damn nightmare. Maya left the second things got hard. I had to beg Greg for money just to get home. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. You said I wasn't fun anymore, I said, voice even. So I gave you an adventure. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. This isn't fair, he hissed. That word, fair. I almost laughed. Fair? I echoed. Fair is me staying home while you played house with someone else. Fair is me carrying this family for decades while you dismissed me like a houseplant. Don't talk to me about fair, Richard. His mouth opened again, then closed. I looked past him, at the boxes. I paid for a moving truck. It'll be here in an hour. You don't need to come in. You can't just erase me like this. I stepped out from behind the screen, finally unlocking the door, but not inviting him in. Just stepping forward until we were face to face. I'm not erasing you, Richard. I'm just putting you exactly where you belong. Out. He stared at me, something breaking in his eyes. The arrogance was gone. The smugness, the certainty, all of it dissolved in the hot Carolina sun. And for the first time in a very, very long time, he looked small, powerless, human. He walked slowly to the boxes, touched one of them, then sat down on the curb like someone who just realized the world didn't revolve around him after all. I closed the door. I didn't lock it right away. I stood behind it and listened to the silence. And I felt nothing. Not sadness, not guilt, not triumph, just peace and the sound of my own breath. The kind you only hear when you're finally, completely alone, in the best possible way. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. I imagine it took a while to find somewhere to go. Friends don't line up to offer couches when you've built your image on having everything together. And mistresses don't usually stick around when the fantasy breaks and the real man underneath is stranded, broke, and boxed up on a driveway. I watched from the window as the moving truck arrived. The two young guys looked confused at first, maybe expecting someone else to greet them. But I handed them the list, pointed to the boxes, and told them exactly where to drop them off. A short-term storage unit rented under his name, using his social security number, which I still had memorized after 30 years of filing taxes together. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. As they drove off, I turned back to the house, my house, and closed the door with a finality I hadn't known I craved. It was done, but not for everyone. That evening, my daughter Emily showed up. She didn't knock, just let herself in like she used to do when she was little. Her heels clicked against the hardwood, and she stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. What did you do to Dad? I didn't look up from the sink where I was washing a plate. I didn't do anything. He did this to himself. Come on, Mom. You sent him to Colombia and then shut off your phone. That's not normal. You humiliated him. I set the plate down slowly. You know what's not normal, Emily? Sleeping beside someone for 3 decades and waking up one day to hear that you're boring, that your presence isn't enough, that you've become invisible in your own marriage. That's not normal. She didn't respond, just stared. And you know what else? I continued. He cheated with a woman he brought on a trip I paid for. That's what your father did. Her mouth opened, then shut. She didn't know. Of course she didn't, because Richard, in all his dramatic retelling, probably left out that part. 15 years ago, I added quietly. He did it the first time, with someone you used to call Aunt Diane. Emily's eyes widened. I found out. I stayed. For you and Daniel. I stayed silent so your childhood wouldn't unravel. Why didn't you tell us? Because children don't need to carry the sins of their parents. And because I still believed people could change. But he didn't. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, suddenly looking like a child again. Her tough exterior cracked, just a little. Why now? Because I'm done. Because I finally chose me. She didn't speak for a long time. Neither of us did. And in that silence, something shifted. A weight passed between us, heavy and raw, but no longer hidden. The next morning, Daniel called. His tone was harsher, defensive. You embarrassed him, he said. He's devastated. Good, I said. There was a pause. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't want you to. I told him the same truth I told Emily. I let it fall out like a long overdue confession. And for once, there was no interruption, no excuses, but I won't apologize for choosing mine. And that was the end of it. That weekend, I sold one of the cars, his car. The funds went directly into an account I opened in my name only. I began clearing out the shared accounts, changing insurance policies, updating titles. Every small step was another thread cut. I wasn't rushing. I was reclaiming. People think divorce is about anger, screaming matches, dramatic exits. But sometimes, it's just a woman with a list, a pen, and a heart no longer willing to wait for someone to see her worth. And as I sat on my back porch, sipping coffee as birds dipped low in the trees, I thought, I have never been more invisible, and I have never been more powerful. They showed up together. Daniel and Emily, my children, my blood. They stood on the front porch like a jury called to pass sentence. Neither of them looked angry, but they didn't look kind either. Just confused, wounded, uncomfortable in the way people are when something they believed in crumbles beneath them. I opened the door and waited. Emily spoke first. Her voice was soft, like she wasn't sure if she should be speaking at all. Can we talk? I stepped aside. They sat in the living room where they'd once built forts with couch cushions, where I had rocked them both to sleep, where Christmas mornings had erupted in torn wrapping paper and laughter. Now it was quiet, still, like even the furniture knew something was different. Daniel rubbed his hands together, staring at the rug. Emily wouldn't look me in the eye. He started. We didn't know how bad it had gotten. I nodded. I know. Why didn't you say anything? Emily asked, her voice cracking. Why did you just act like everything was fine? Because that's what I was taught to do, I said quietly. You keep the family together. You protect your children from pain. You make it work. I stood by the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. Outside, the neighborhood was still, quiet, normal. Then I turned around and said the thing I hadn't said out loud to anyone. I knew about your father's first affair 15 years ago. Both of them looked up at once. It was with Diane. You remember her? Aunt Diane, as you used to call her. Emily gasped. Daniel stared at me like he didn't understand the words. I found out by accident. He left his email open. There were messages, photos, a flight itinerary. Mom, Emily whispered, covering her mouth. I confronted him. He denied it. Then he admitted it. He begged, promised it was over, that it had meant nothing. And I believed him. Why? Daniel asked, almost angry. Because you were both still in school, because we had just refinanced the house, because the idea of being alone terrified me more than the betrayal. I sat down then, finally, my knees trembling, not from pain, but from finally standing in truth after carrying it for so long. I stayed, thinking I could fix it, that I could make him love me again, that if I gave enough time, support, loyalty, it would be worth it. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't cry. I watched him pull away piece by piece, until there was nothing left of the man I married, just a stranger who used my silence as permission. They were both quiet, processing. I'm sorry, I said, not for what I did to him, but for what I hid from you. Emily wiped her eyes. Daniel looked away. Then, a pause, and Emily whispered, You should have left him then. I know, I said, but I wasn't ready. Daniel nodded slowly. So, what now? He asked. You're really divorcing him? No. The prenup handled that for me. They looked surprised. He signed it 30 years ago. Infidelity meant he walked away with nothing. He thought it was a joke. I didn't. They both sat back, quiet. And then Emily said something I never expected to hear. I'm proud of you. It came out small, like a secret she was scared to admit, but it landed like thunder in my heart. I smiled. Thank you. She paused. I wish I'd seen it sooner. I didn't want you to. I wanted you to have a happy childhood, even if it cost me mine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was reverent, They didn't stay long. They left together, arms brushing, walking slower than usual. And when the door closed, I stood in the middle of the house that had once held my whole life. Now it held something new, the truth. And finally, I wasn't the only one carrying it. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not because I was checking for new wrinkles or wondering whether my gray roots were showing, but because, for the first time in years, I actually recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes weren't tired anymore. Her shoulders weren't slumped. There was something new in her expression, something fierce. I'd spent most of my adult life looking past myself, at the kids, at Richard, at to-do lists and calendars and dentist appointments, at everyone else's needs. Now, I looked at me. I pulled out a notebook from the kitchen drawer, the one where we used to keep shopping lists and old coupons. I flipped it to a blank page and wrote 3 words at the top in bold letters: "Start over now." And underneath, I made a list: sell the SUV, close joint accounts, get a P.O. box, meet with a realtor, find a new place, not too big, but sunny, start sketching again, open that Etsy store I always talked about. Each line felt like a shovel, unearthing the parts of me that had been buried under 30 years of later. I called the bank, the lawyer, the realtor. I listed the SUV online, posted clean photos, and cleaned out the glove box. Inside was a half-used parking pass from one of Richard's work trips. I smiled and tossed it in the trash. That afternoon, I visited the small strip of shops downtown, the ones I used to walk past every Saturday, but never entered because Richard hated small business prices. I bought myself a leather-bound sketch pad. Expensive, luxurious. I didn't flinch when they rang it up. At home, I opened the pad and drew for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. My hands were rusty, but it was mine. A landscape, unfinished, but open, free, like me. When I told Emily and Daniel I was selling the house, they were stunned. "But it's the house we grew up in," Daniel said, eyes wide. "It's also the house I died in, piece by piece," I said gently. "It's time." They didn't argue. They helped me box up the rest of it. The good memories, the heirlooms, the holiday decorations I couldn't part with. I donated old furniture, called the realtor, listed it within a week. And when the offers came in, I picked the one from a young couple with a baby on the way. Let it hold joy again. Let it hold someone else's beginning. I signed the papers on a Wednesday and closed the door for the last time. That evening, I moved into a bright 2-bedroom condo on the edge of town. It had a balcony that overlooked a park, light that spilled across the hardwood floors in the morning, and a tiny spare room I turned into a studio. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't a status symbol. It was freedom. My phone buzzed the first night. "Richard, please just talk to me." I didn't respond. I stared out at the stars from my new balcony and whispered into the night, "You had your chance." Because the truth was, I had begged for years, for attention, for affection, for kindness. And now that I was gone, he finally heard me. But I wasn't speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to myself. And for the first time, I was listening. I was unpacking the last box, the one labeled Carolyn's desk, full of old journals, pens, paper clips, and faded thank you cards, when I heard the knock. It was soft, hesitant, not like the way Richard used to knock, not when he thought he owned the space behind the door. I knew it was him before I even looked through the peephole. He stood there in a wrinkled blue button-down, holding nothing. His hands were empty. So was his face, stripped of arrogance, charm, everything he'd ever used as armor. "Carolyn," he said when I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. He didn't expect to be. "I found your new place," he added, glancing at the number on the door. "Emily told me. I asked her not to, but she thought you might want to hear me out." I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You shouldn't have come." "I know." He looked smaller than the last time I saw him. Not in stature, but in presence. Like he'd been weathered. Like the world had finally caught up to him and started collecting the debt. He ran a hand through his hair, which was grayer than I remembered. "I came to say I'm sorry." Silence. I was a coward. A selfish, blind, pathetic coward. Still, I said nothing. I didn't see what I had. And I thought I could replace what I lost with something shiny and easy. But the truth is, nothing I ever had with anyone else came close to what I ruined with you. I let his words sit there. I didn't soften. I didn't lean in. Because while he had been breaking me down one day at a time, I had rebuilt myself. I know I don't deserve anything from you, he continued. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but I needed to face you. I needed to see your eyes and know you heard it. I finally spoke. You left a long time ago, Richard. This isn't about Cartagena, or Maya, or the hotel that didn't exist. This is about every silent dinner, every ignored moment, every time you looked past me like I was furniture. He lowered his eyes. I know. And I let you, I continued. I let you shrink me. I let myself disappear. He started to speak, but I stopped him. But not anymore. I stepped out onto the balcony and motioned to the view. Trees, kids playing in the park, dogs barking somewhere in the distance. This is my space now. My life. He looked at me, really looked at me. You're glowing, he said. I nodded. That's what happens when you stop watering dead plants. He smiled faintly. It wasn't sarcastic. It was sad. Real. I don't have a home, he said quietly. That's not my problem anymore. He nodded, swallowed hard. I'll go now. I didn't stop him. He walked down the hall slowly, like he didn't know where to go next, and maybe he didn't. I closed the door behind him. No tears came, no regrets, just a calm, steady stillness, the kind you only get when the past stops knocking. There are mornings when the light pours in just right, and for a second, everything is still. No buzzing phones, no expectations, no tension humming beneath the surface of a too-quiet breakfast table. Just the breeze, the warmth, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I live for those mornings now. My name is still Carolyn Whitaker, but I've changed in every way that matters. After Richard left my doorway that night, I didn't hear from him again, at least not directly. Emily said he was staying with a college friend across town, trying to get back on his feet. Daniel mentioned he'd picked up part-time work consulting for small firms, but neither of them pushed me. Not anymore. They saw the lines in the sand. They saw the woman I'd become. And more importantly, they respected her. In the month since, I sold the last of our joint possessions, finalized the separation of all legal and financial ties, and invested in something I never thought I'd have again. Myself. I opened that online store, Sketch and Soul. It's small, but it's mine. People order prints of my drawings, landscapes, abstract emotion pieces, scenes from memory. Each one carries a piece of the quiet, powerful shift that saved me. And once a week, I teach an art class at the local community center. Women show up, older, younger, some heartbroken, some just tired, and we sit in a circle, sketching, shading, telling stories between pencil strokes. We don't always talk about what we've lost, but sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a shared silence between people who finally decided to choose themselves. I still walk through the park most mornings. There's an oak tree by the path with a bench beneath it. I sit there with a thermos of coffee and watch the joggers go by. Kids chase each other, dogs bark at squirrels, and the world spins on, lighter, cleaner. One day, a letter came in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was short. Carolyn, I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. I never really knew how much damage I caused until I had to sit with it in silence. And I finally understand that the silence you gave me was louder than anything you could have said. I'm sorry for everything, and thank you for setting me free too. Richard. I folded it neatly and slid it into the back of my sketch pad, not because I needed to keep it, but because it was the final chapter, the end of the story I'd never asked to write, but wrote anyway. A woman doesn't always get her justice in courtrooms or public apologies. Sometimes, she gets it in the quiet decision to choose herself after decades of being everyone else's anchor, and when she finally releases the weight of what she was never meant to carry, something remarkable happens. She floats. I sit here now, on my balcony, watching the sun disappear behind the trees, sketchbook on my lap, pencil in hand, and for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone to see me, because I see myself, and I love the view. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.